Welcome back to Steve Harvey Motivasion Speech. Ladies and gentlemen, black people are not cursed. They are chosen as the true descendants of Shem. For generations, society has painted us with a brush of falsehood, trying to convince us that our history began with chains and ended in struggle. But that is a lie designed to keep us small, a deception meant to rob us of the knowledge of who we truly are. When you open the scripture and trace the lineages, when you examine history with eyes unclouded by propaganda, you begin to see that our roots are far deeper, our calling far greater, and our place in God's design much more powerful than we were ever told. We are not the children of a curse. We are the heirs of a blessing, the carriers of a divine promise, the descendants of Shem, the son through whom covenant and greatness were passed down. You see, curses have been spoken over us by men, but blessings were spoken over us by God himself, and his word outweighs every lie. Shem was set apart among his brothers, the one from whom Abraham would come, and from Abraham the great nations, the prophets, and the heritage of faith. That same line flows through us, which means the blessing that mocked Shem has mocked us as well. And this is why no matter what the world has done to break us, it has never succeeded. Because chosen blood does not bow forever, chosen people do not vanish from history, chosen descendants cannot be erased from the promise. When you look across time, you see the evidence. From the kingdoms of Africa that thrived long before slavery was ever a thought, to the brilliance of our scholars, scientists, artists, and leaders who rose even in the darkest times of oppression, the mark of Shem is undeniable. You cannot explain our survival without it. You cannot explain our endurance without it. And you cannot explain our influence without acknowledging the blessing. Even when stripped of names, land, and language, our spirit carried an unshakable truth, that we were not forgotten, that we were still connected to something ancient and divine. That's why, though chains bound our bodies, they could not bind our destiny. And isn't it interesting how the world has always tried to define us as less than, while at the same time imitating everything about us? They took from our culture, borrowed from our rhythms, adopted our style, yet told us we were cursed. But the truth always finds its way through, and the truth says we are chosen. Look at the way innovation, music, art, and strength flow through us. It is the manifestation of divine favor. It is the evidence of a lineage tied to greatness. If we were cursed, we would have disappeared. If we were cursed, our legacy would have ended. If we were cursed, our voice would have been silenced. But instead, every attempt to bury us only planted us deeper, and every time we rise stronger than before. The descendants of Shem were blessed to be a light, blessed to carry wisdom, blessed to endure and multiply. That blessing does not skip generations. It does not fade because of man's opinion. It remains, and it remains with us. This is why the spirit inside us cries out for something greater, why we are never satisfied with mediocrity, why we keep pushing boundaries and breaking ceilings. It is not arrogance, it is inheritance. We were born with the right to walk in the authority of the blessing, yet so often we've been tricked into believing we are less. That is the real tragedy. Not that others lied to us, but that too many of us believed the lie. We believed that being black meant being cursed, being doomed, being lesser. But once you know the truth, once you grasp that you are chosen, everything changes. Your posture changes, your mindset shifts, your spirit awakens. You begin to carry yourself differently because you are no longer begging for a place at the table. You realize you are part of the family that built the table. You are no longer searching for identity. You are reclaiming one that was already yours. When you know you are a descendant of Shem, you stop walking with shame and start walking with authority. You stop looking at history as something that defines your pain and start seeing it as evidence of your resilience. You begin to realize that the very fact we are still here, still thriving, still creating, still influencing the world is proof enough of the blessing. Cursed people do not rise this way. Cursed people do not endure like this. Cursed people do not shine generation after generation. Only a chosen people can take centuries of oppression and still emerge unbroken. Only a chosen people can be stripped of everything, yet still give the world music, art, invention, leadership, and wisdom. Only a chosen people can survive fire and still come out shining brighter. Black people are not cursed. They are chosen. And when you finally believe that, when you allow that truth to settle into your bones, you begin to live differently. You begin to dream differently, you begin to move differently, because you realize your destiny has been written long before the world tried to rewrite it. You realize that no matter the attempt to erase you, diminish you, or redefine you, the truth of who you are cannot be erased. You realize that everything about you, your strength, your resilience, your creativity, your endurance, is tied to the blessing spoken over Shem and passed down through the generations until it rests in you today. The blessing of Shem is unbreakable and cannot be erased by history or oppression. From the very beginning, when Noah spoke blessings over his sons, Shem was singled out and set apart as the one through whom a divine promise would flow. That promise was not temporary, it was not fragile, and it was not conditional upon the approval of men. It was a blessing spoken by God, and when God speaks, no force in the earth can reverse it. This is why, no matter how many generations have passed, no matter how much rewriting of history has taken place, and no matter how much oppression has been inflicted, the blessing of Shem continues to stand firm. Every attempt to erase the truth has failed, because what comes from God cannot be undone by man. Empires have risen and fallen, rulers have tried to change records, and systems have been built to bury the identity of a chosen people. But the blessing continues to reveal itself. That is why it keeps surfacing in the most unlikely places. That is why people who were stripped of their names, their heritage, and their languages could still rise and excel, still create beauty, still impact the world in ways that cannot be ignored. The blessing of Shem does not die with hardship. It grows stronger in hardship. It thrives under pressure. It multiplies in adversity. Look at history. There were centuries where black people were told they were nothing more than property, bought and sold as if they had no soul. Yet even in those dark times, the songs they sang carried power. The culture they preserved carried strength, and the hope they refused to let go of carried the evidence of a deeper promise. Chains could hold their hands, but they could not hold their spirit. Whips could scar their backs, but they could not scar their destiny. That resilience was not natural. It was divine. It was the manifestation of a blessing that cannot be broken. Even in modern times, the same pattern continues. Systems of oppression still exist, barriers are still built, and attempts to silence voices still happen, but the blessing always pushes through. Look at how innovation, influence, and excellence continue to flow. From sports to music, from science to politics, from business to culture, the fingerprint of greatness shows up wherever descendants of Shem are found. It is not coincidence. It is covenant. A covenant cannot be erased because it was established by the one whose word never returns void. Think about it. If history could erase the blessing, then the story of black people would have ended in slavery. If oppression could break the blessing, then the story would have ended in segregation, in colonization, in chain. But instead, every generation brought forth voices that broke barriers, leaders who shifted nations, and creators who changed the world. That is the undeniable evidence that the blessing remains. It is like a seed planted so deep that no storm can uproot it. You can cover it with dirt, you can step on it, you can try to bury it, but eventually it breaks through the ground again, stronger and greener than before. The blessing of Shem also carries identity. It carries a truth that cannot be permanently hidden, no matter how distorted history books may become. There are records that have been altered, maps that have been redrawn, and narratives that have been manipulated, but the true descendants of Shem are still rising. The bloodline has not been lost, and the evidence is in the strength of a people who refuse to die out, who refuse to be erased, who refuse to let go of hope even in the darkest of times. Oppression has always tried to rewrite stories. It tried to tell us we were cursed when in fact we were blessed. It tried to tell us we were inferior, when in reality we are heirs to a promise. It tried to convince us to walk small, to think small, and to live small, but the blessing inside keeps pulling us toward greatness. That is why you feel that restlessness inside, that hunger for something more, that drive to break boundaries. It is not just ambition, it is inheritance. It is the unshakable blessing of Shem calling you forward, reminding you that you were never meant to be contained. This is why, when others look at black people and wonder how they can keep surviving, keep creating, keep influencing, the answer is simple. The blessing of Shem cannot be broken. You cannot legislate it away. You cannot oppress it out. You cannot educate it out of people's minds. You cannot chain it, whip it, or silence it. It will always find expression because it is eternal. It is not rooted in circumstances. It is rooted in the Word of God. So every attempt to destroy, every attempt to diminish, every attempt to bury the truth has only made the blessing more visible. The more pressure placed upon us, the more the blessing reveals itself. The more systems built against us, the more ways we find to break through those systems. The more lies told about our identity, the louder the truth rises in the hearts of those who know they are more than what the world has called them. The blessing of Shem is unbreakable. It is why our presence is felt in every sphere of life. It is why we have influence even when resources are denied. It is why creativity flows even when opportunity is blocked. It is why leadership rises even when doors are closed. The blessing is not something the world can give, so it is not something the world can take away. It was given by God, sealed by covenant, and carried through generations, and no history book, no system of oppression, no attempt at erasure can undo it. Our resilience, creativity, and leadership prove the covenant still lives in us. When you study the journey of black people across history, you cannot escape the undeniable evidence that something greater than circumstance has been at work within us. It is not by chance that a people so oppressed, so stripped of identity, so denied opportunity, continue to rise time and time again. It is not by chance that in the face of unimaginable trials, we have not only survived but thrived, leaving a mark on every corner of the earth we touch. That is the covenant alive, the blessing spoken over Shem, flowing through generations and manifesting itself in ways that cannot be denied. Resilience has been our heartbeat since the beginning. The covenant was never about a life free from struggle. It was about a power to endure and overcome whatever comes. That is why, even through slavery, colonization, segregation, and systemic oppression, we kept moving forward. Others may see resilience as simply bouncing back, but for us it has meant transforming pain into strength, turning loss into wisdom, and carrying the torch of hope when everything around us said we should give up. That kind of resilience is not ordinary, it is divine. It is proof that something unbreakable lives inside us, something the world did not give and cannot take away. Creativity is another undeniable sign that the covenant is alive. Creativity is not just about art, music, or invention. It is about the divine spark to bring forth something new where there was nothing. That has been our story. From spirituals sung in the fields that carried hidden codes of liberation, to jazz, blues, gospel, hip-hop, and every rhythm that now defines global culture, creativity has poured out of us like rivers. It is why fashion, language, dance, and innovation so often flow from our communities and then ripple across the world. The covenant is alive in our ability to create beauty from ashes, to innovate when resources are scarce, to make a way out of no way. Even when denied access, our creativity breaks barriers, sets trends, and shifts culture. That is not coincidence, that is covenant. Leadership, too, is a clear mark of the blessing. Leadership is not just about titles or positions, it is about influence, vision, and the ability to carry others forward. Our history is filled with men and women who stood in the gap, who spoke truth to power, who bore the weight of movements that changed the world. From the fight against slavery to the struggle for civil rights, from independence movements in Africa to modern voices demanding justice, leadership has continued to emerge from our people. And even beyond political or social movements, leadership shows up in everyday life in communities, in families, in schools, in churches, in businesses. It shows up when a mother raises her children with strength despite hardship, when a father teaches resilience in the face of struggle, when a young person inspires peers to dream bigger than their surroundings. That kind of leadership flows because the covenant flows. The covenant is not just something written on pages. It is alive in us, proven by what we do, how we live, and how we rise. Our resilience says the covenant is unbroken. Our creativity says the blessing still breathes. Our leadership says the promise continues through every generation. If the covenant were dead, we would not have survived. If it were gone, we would have been erased long ago. But every time history tries to silence us, we find a new voice. Every time systems try to block us, we find a new path. Every time we are told we are nothing, we remind the world that we are something greater than they imagine. Look at how resilience has carried us, from shackles to freedom, from Jim Crow to the White House, from colonial rule to self-determination. Resilience has proven that we cannot be destroyed. Look at how creativity has placed us at the center of global influence, shaping culture, art, science, and technology in ways the world cannot ignore. Look at how leadership continues to emerge, challenging injustices, inspiring generations, and paving the way for transformation. None of this is accidental. None of this is just talent or survival instinct. This is covenant in action, a living testament that God's blessing is still flowing, still alive, still undeniable. Resilience, creativity, and leadership are woven into our DNA. They are not traits we developed by accident. They are traits birthed out of a divine lineage. They are the fruit of a blessing that was spoken long before we were born and will continue long after us. That is why we must never believe the lie that we are less, that we are cursed, or that we are forgotten. The evidence is in us, the proof is in our story, and the world cannot deny it no matter how hard it tries. Even now, in the modern age, our covenantal traits continue to shine. The resilience to endure systemic injustice and still demand change. The creativity to lead in technology, art, business, and culture, despite being underfunded or overlooked. The leadership to inspire nations, to rally communities, to envision futures brighter than the past. These are not temporary flashes of brilliance. They are the ongoing revelation of a covenant that cannot be broken. The blessing of Shem still breathes, and it breathes through us. Our story is the living evidence. The world imitates us because we are the origin and the blueprint of greatness. From the beginning of civilization, black people have been at the foundation of culture, science, spirituality, and progress. Yet history has often been rewritten to exclude our contribution. But no matter how much erasure has been attempted, the truth always finds a way to rise, and the evidence is everywhere. Look at the pyramids of Egypt, the libraries of Timbuktu, the empires of Mali, Songhai, and Kush. Look at the wisdom of early medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy that came out of Africa. These were not borrowed ideas. They were the seeds planted by the descendants of Shem, the blueprint of greatness from which the world has continued to copy. Even today, you can see how the world leans on our influence. Our style, our music, our creativity, our speech, our rhythm. It gets copied, repackaged, and sold back to the world as if it were new. But deep down, the world knows where it came from. They know who set the standard, they know who carried the blueprint. Whether it is in fashion, entertainment, athletics, or language, you cannot escape our influence. It is not arrogance to say we are the origin. It is truth backed by history and culture. We create and the world imitates because we carry a blessing that gives birth to innovation. Think about music alone. From spirituals born in the fields to gospel that shook the church, from blues and jazz that set the foundation for modern sound, to hip-hop that now dominates global culture, our music has always been the pulse of the world. Every new sound we create becomes the standard others follow. Every beat we produce echoes in nations far from our own. That is not coincidence, that is origin. The same is true in dance, in art, in literature, in speech. Our expressions become universal expressions because there is something divine in the way we move, the way we speak, the way we create. Fashion tells the same story. The hairstyles, the clothing, the designs that begin in our communities become trends across continents. What was once mocked is suddenly celebrated when worn by others, but the source remains the same. We are the blueprint. Our creativity does not stop at expression. It shapes the world's expression. It shapes what is considered beautiful, powerful, and relevant. Even when credit is not given, even when names are erased, the imprint of our genius cannot be denied. Athletics give another example. From running tracks to basketball courts, from boxing rings to football fields, the excellence of black athletes continues to inspire and lead the world. It is not just physical ability. It is determination, discipline, and brilliance expressed through the body. We redefine what is possible, and then the world follows. The standard keeps being pushed higher because the blueprint of greatness cannot be contained. Others train to reach the level we naturally rise to, and that is the evidence of something greater within us. But it is not only in culture or sports. Our influence reaches into leadership, into vision, into the power to transform society. Movements for justice and equality across the world have drawn strength from the resilience and leadership of black people. The speeches, the protests, the sacrifices made have inspired nations beyond our own. When we stand, others find the courage to stand. When we fight for justice, others are reminded of their own. That is the power of being the origin. It means others look to you as a guide, whether they admit it or not. And isn't it telling that so often what we create is imitated without acknowledgement? That's because the world recognizes the value but does not always want to credit the source. Yet imitation itself is proof. If we were not the origin, why would they copy us? If we were not the blueprint, why would the world draw from our example again and again? It is because there is something in us, something divine, that keeps birthing what others cannot. That is the blessing at work, the covenant showing itself in creativity and influence that cannot be contained. The world may try to dismiss us, but it cannot function without us. It may try to minimize us, but it cannot stop imitating us. It may try to silence us, but it cannot stop amplifying what comes from us. Every attempt to erase our role only highlights it more, because every generation continues to bring forth something so powerful, so unique, that it cannot be hidden. The very trends that dominate global culture today started in the same communities that the world once looked down upon. That is not chance, that is destiny. We are the origin, the root from which many branches have grown. We are the blueprint, the pattern of greatness that others study, imitate, and attempt to replicate. But a copy can never outshine the original, because the original carries the true essence. That essence is in us. It is in our walk, our talk, our music, our art, our leadership, our endurance. It is in the way we rise after every setback, the way we shine even when denied light, the way we lead even when given no seat at the table. Our resilience gave us the strength to endure, our creativity gave us the tools to express, and our leadership gave us the vision to guide. The world imitates us because the world cannot escape the truth. We are the origin, and the blueprint of greatness rests within us. Knowing our true identity unlocks our power and purpose. For centuries, the greatest weapon used against us has not been chains, whips, or even laws. It has been lies. Lies about who we are, where we come from, and what we are capable of. Lies that tried to convince us we are cursed when in reality we are blessed. Lies that told us our history began with slavery instead of kings, queens, inventors, and prophets. The moment you believe a lie about yourself, you start living beneath your potential. But the moment you discover the truth about who you are, everything shifts. Identity is not just a label, it is the key that unlocks destiny. When we know that we are the descendants of Shem, chosen by God, heirs of a covenant that cannot be broken, we begin to live with power and purpose the world cannot deny. Think about it like this: if someone steals your name, they can control your story. If someone rewrites your history, they can dictate your future. That is why identity has always been attacked. That is why records were changed, books were burned, languages were stripped, and cultures were demonized. Because the enemy knew that if you don't know who you are, you will settle for anything. You will accept labels that do not belong to you. You will live as though you are cursed when you are actually chosen. But once the truth of your identity is restored, no system, no lie, no voice of doubt can keep you from stepping into purpose. Knowing your true identity changes how you see yourself. You stop looking at your reflection as ordinary and start seeing the mark of a divine covenant in your eyes. You stop walking like someone waiting for permission and start walking like someone who carries inheritance. You stop questioning your worth and start living as someone who has been called for greatness since the beginning of time. This kind of confidence does not come from ego. It comes from awareness. Awareness of where you come from, awareness of what is inside you, awareness of the blessing that runs through your veins. When you know your true identity, you stop living in reaction to the world and start living in alignment with your calling. Suddenly, the things that used to break you cannot break you anymore because you realize you were built for more. Suddenly, the doors that were closed no longer intimidate you because you realize you were never meant to wait for doors. You were meant to build your own. Suddenly, the opportunities others withhold do not determine your future because you understand your future was already spoken over you by God Himself. Power is not about controlling others. It is about realizing no one else controls you. Purpose becomes clearer when identity is embraced. Too many people wander through life not because they lack talent, but because they lack identity. They do not know who they are, so they settle for small visions, for shallow dreams, for positions beneath their calling. But when you know you are chosen, you begin to dream differently. You dream as a builder, as a leader, as a creator, as someone carrying generational destiny. You stop chasing survival and start chasing purpose. You stop living in fear of what others say about you and start living in confidence of what God has already said about you. Look at the power of knowing your identity across history. The civil rights movement was not just about laws. It was about reclaiming dignity, reclaiming worth, reclaiming identity. Leaders rose not because they were the strongest physically, but because they were strong in identity. They knew who they were and what they stood for, and that knowledge gave them power to stand against systems bigger than themselves. That same truth lives in us today. The more we know our identity, the more unstoppable we become. Identity is also generational. When you embrace who you are, you pass that truth to your children, and they grow up unafraid to shine. A child who knows they are chosen carries themselves differently in classrooms, in workplaces, in communities. They don't bow to peer pressure the same way. They don't let rejection crush them the same way, because they know their value is rooted in something eternal. Imagine generations raised with this awareness. Generations who know they are descendants of Shem, heirs of blessing, not beggars of validation. That kind of generation shifts nations. The enemy of your soul knows this, which is why he works overtime to distort identity. He tries to confuse us with division, with labels, with lies that distract us from the truth. But the covenant still speaks, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Once you recognize that you are chosen, you can no longer accept being treated as less. Once you grasp that you are blessed, you can no longer live as if you are cursed. That knowledge awakens something deep inside that was always there but waiting to be unlocked. Our power is not in weapons or wealth. It is in identity. Our purpose is not found in what the world says about us. It is found in who God has declared us to be. That is why the greatest revolution we can ever have is not external, but internal. The revolution begins when we reject the lies and embrace the truth. When we look in the mirror and see royalty, when we read history and see ourselves, when we read scripture and recognize our bloodline, that is when the covenant moves from being words on a page to being power in our lives. Knowing our true identity unlocks the resilience to endure, the creativity to build, and the leadership to guide. It awakens the dormant dreams, it fuels the vision, it gives courage where there was once fear. It is the key that has been hidden from us, but once found, it cannot be taken away again. Knowing our true identity is the beginning of walking in true freedom, true power, and true purpose. A people who embrace their divine lineage are unstoppable. When you know where you come from and you understand the bloodline that flows through you, no obstacle in this world can stand in your way. The truth is, identity produces confidence, confidence produces vision, and vision produces action. When that cycle is rooted in divine lineage, it becomes a force that no system, no weapon, no scheme can ever destroy. A people who have been told for centuries that they were cursed, only to awaken to the truth that they are chosen, become a people who cannot be contained. When you understand that you are the descendants of Shem, heirs to a covenant that began with God himself, you begin to realize that everything about you carries power. Unstoppable does not mean life will be free of challenges. It means that no matter the challenge, you will rise above it. It means setbacks become stepping stones, trials become testimonies, and pain becomes power. The world has tried for centuries to stop us, to silence us, to erase us, but the more they pressed, the more we grew. That is what happens when a people awaken to divine lineage. They realize that every attempt to bury them is really just planting them deeper, preparing them to rise again stronger. History shows us over and over that no matter what was thrown against us, we kept coming back. That is not mere survival, that is unstoppable power born out of covenant. When a people know their divine lineage, fear loses its grip. Fear thrives where identity is uncertain, where worth is questioned, where destiny is doubted. But when you know you are chosen, fear becomes powerless. That is why movements have been led by men and women who refused to bow, who refused to be intimidated, who stood in the face of violence, hatred, and injustice with courage unshaken. They knew they were fighting not just for themselves, but for a covenant too strong to break. Their courage flowed from the knowledge that they were part of something eternal. That same courage lives in us, waiting to be unlocked when we accept who we are. A people rooted in divine lineage also walk with vision. Vision is the ability to see beyond the moment into the promise ahead. Too often, oppression tries to keep people so focused on survival that they forget to dream. But when you know you are chosen, you start dreaming again. You start building again. You start envisioning futures beyond chains, beyond poverty, beyond systemic barriers. Vision leads to innovation, and innovation changes the world. That is why communities stripped of resources still birth leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, and visionaries who shape culture globally. That is the power of lineage speaking through us, reminding us that no matter how small the present looks, the future is destined for greatness. Divine lineage also brings unity. Division has always been a tool used to weaken people who carry greatness. If you can keep them fighting among themselves, they will never recognize their collective power. But when a people remember they are family, connected by covenant, tied together by purpose, they become unshakable. Unity fueled by divine identity is unstoppable because it multiplies strength. One voice can be silenced, but a united people cannot. One dreamer can be dismissed, but a generation of dreamers cannot. When we embrace our lineage, we begin to see each other not as competitors, but as brothers and sisters moving toward the same destiny. And let us not forget that divine lineage carries favor. Favor is not earned, it is inherited. It is the open door no one can shut, the opportunity that appears when others think it impossible, the protection that surrounds you when everything says you should fall. A people walking in divine favor are a people who keep rising against the odds. Look at the countless times history tried to bury us in despair, yet hope kept springing forth. That hope is not shallow optimism. It is divine favor sustaining a chosen people. Favor makes you unstoppable because it places you steps ahead of the schemes meant to hold you back. When a people embrace their lineage, they stop living small. They stop apologizing for their greatness. They stop waiting for permission to lead and begin leading boldly. They stop carrying shame and start carrying pride rooted in truth, not arrogance but awareness. This is when communities transform, when nations shift, when history bends. The power of an awakened people is unmatched. That is why systems of oppression have always fought so hard to keep us asleep. Because once we wake up, we cannot be stopped. Once we embrace the truth, we cannot be controlled. Once we claim our lineage, we begin to walk in the fullness of the blessing. You see it in the resilience that refuses to die, in the creativity that keeps breaking barriers, in the leadership that keeps rising generation after generation. These are not random traits. They are the fingerprints of divine lineage. They are the proof that the covenant still lives, that the blessing still flows, that the descendants of Shem are still carrying destiny. A people who recognize this cannot be broken by history, cannot be diminished by oppression, cannot be silenced by lies. They are too deeply rooted in truth, too strongly anchored in identity, too powerfully connected to divine promise. The world fears an awakened people because they know that when identity is restored, purpose is activated. And when purpose is activated, nothing stands in the way. That is why embracing divine lineage is more than just knowledge. It is power. It is the fuel that takes you from surviving to thriving, from existing to leading, from being silenced to being a voice that changes nations. A people who embrace their divine lineage do not just live, they transform everything around them. A people who embrace their divine lineage carry unstoppable energy, unstoppable vision, unstoppable faith, and unstoppable strength, because they know exactly who they are and whose they are.